This tour is a lot quieter.
Wait, I know. Are you gonna give? No, I brought nice. I'll give you that. Look at it out. I'll give you my money.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. You've come to Epic Fail. Was Darwin wrong? And this is the third presentation we've done in this room this week, the final presentation on campus. And we did, our first night was biology was the topic. Last night was fossils. And tonight we are going to look at geology. Who's the hero of the plot? Time, water, or catastrophe? So we're excited about that tonight. We are Maranatha Christian Fellowship and International Student Outreach. And I am Pastor Parnell Mahoney. And tomorrow night will be our last presentation, but that will be at our church. So we meet and worship on Saturday nights. And if you are interested in catching part 4 of this series, you can come to our worship meeting. We're not going to have a regular sermon out of the Bible. We're going to talk about dinosaurs. So that topic is dinosaurs and dragons, the hard and the soft facts. So we're excited about that presentation. And oh, by the way, in case you're concerned, we do believe dinosaurs are real. Okay. All right. So we have an information table over here. You can see the Maranatha tablecloth. You're free to grab anything off that table that you like. We have a sign-up sheet where if you're interested in our worship meetings or our Bible studies or hearing about our future events, you can just indicate what you're interested in, give us your contact information, and we'll follow up with you. And also, Dave and Mary Jo Nutting have some materials for sale here, but you can just check them out if you're curious. They don't really make a lot of money off of these, but they believe in these materials. They think they're worth you purchasing them if you're interested. So you can always buy them somewhere else, or you can just look at them, get an idea of what's up here. Dave might reference those. So these ones are not for the taking unless you want to buy them. So why are we doing this presentation? Good question. You've heard of the expression, we are all stardust. You guys heard of that? So that expression is a nod to evolutionary assumptions, basically that we came from the stars, right? And it's also used by some people to ascribe to us lofty origins, right? To say you're important, you're special, you're stardust, right? It's kind of a cool sounding expression. However, evolutionary theory leaves us wondering if you and I have real intrinsic value or meaning, right? If you just came from stars, is there any intrinsic value or meaning to your life? And we feel that there's another explanation that points to our supreme origin and our value and our destiny. And that's what motivates us to put these presentations on. Here's a few things that we like. For in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. And then God said, let us make man in our image. Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. And then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He became, well, I got a different translation here. It's almost like I know it by heart. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. So these things speak to our origins as being made in the image of God. And we feel that makes you significant, that gives you value, and that motivates us. So the presentation tonight is going to be an hour and 15 minutes, Dave, is that right?
That's about right.
About right, all right. And there's going to be a question and answer period following the presentation. So we're excited about that part too. We hope you have some good questions. If you have hard questions, we like hard questions. That's where it gets real. A little bit about Dave and Mary Jo Nutting. They live in Grand Junction, Colorado. They both like hiking. Dave is an avid fly fisherman, and Mary Jo is from Mankato, Minnesota. Dave's originally from Grand Junction. Mary Jo enjoys time with her grandkids. And they are both former evolutionists who have carefully studied the scientific issues and became convinced of the truth of creation. They are founders of and directors of Alpha Omega Institute. They have been teaching creation science for nearly 40 years. They have advanced degrees, Dave in mathematics and geology, and Mary Jo in biology, with a science education emphasis. Both have taught at the high school and the college level. And these presentations are being recorded. They're available on Zoom. So if you would like to, share it with a friend or go view it later or go check out the first two presentations, ask me for that information where you can find it. Now we get it up on our YouTube channel. That's where we post it after the Zoom is done. So you can get more on that. So without further ado, we're going to start today's presentation. Please welcome Dave Nutting.
Oh, it's good to be with you, that's for sure. So it's good to see some familiar faces and see some old friends. Well, there's some younger friends too, but no, it's good to see you all. So we're going to be talking about geology tonight, mostly. And so basically what we're going to be looking at is the topic here, geology, who's the hero of the plot? Is it time, billions and millions of years of it? Or is it water? Or is it catastrophe? Or is it a combination of the three? Okay, or a combination of only two, maybe. So we're going to be looking at that tonight. And we'll have to start off by saying this. Your interpretation of geology is frequently affected by your worldview. If you have a worldview that only allows for evolution and millions of years of evolution, and millions of years are necessary for evolution, then you're going to be interpreting those rock layers only one way, as millions of years. And I like the idea of different color lenses. If you look at a white wall through a red lens, that wall looks red, doesn't it? If you look at the same wall through blue lenses, you're going to see blue. And if you look at the rock layers through lenses that say evolution all over it, you're going to see the millions and millions of years that is required by evolution. And I'm going to have to say, I used to view all of the geologic layers through that lens of evolution. I did all the time. And then all of a sudden I started seeing there's another picture emerging here when I started doing some of my own research. And part of the reason for it is I had a pastor one time up in Alaska. I was comfortable with, for a long time, with evolution and church, tried to put it together. But I became a creationist. But I had a pastor who said, "Oh, you're from Western Colorado." And we live in Grand Junction, Colorado, by the way. And you must see the evidence for the flood, don't you? We were really polite. We didn't laugh in his face. We went home and laughed. Can you believe that pastor? He actually believed in Noah and the flood. Come on now, get real, right? And next time, that was up in Alaska where I was teaching, or Mary Jo and I were teaching. Next time we got to Grand Junction, I was out in the desert, the same spot that I had spent hours and hours and hours, many days work on a certain ridge. And that was one of my favorite places to look for fossils of dinosaurs, okay? And I was on that ridge looking over it, and all of a sudden, like, things started shifting. No, the rocks weren't moving. We weren't having a big gigantic fault and earthquakes. But all of a sudden, I started seeing a different perspective. And all of a sudden, I could see that through a catastrophic geologic viewpoint instead of slow and gradual processes over millions of years. And I said, wait a minute, look at this. I'm seeing things I've never seen before. Maybe this pastor was right. And I was kind of blinded to see it because my glasses would basically, at that point, my lenses would filter out anything that would support creation or the flood. Did you know that? But if you allow for the possibility of creation, if you allow for the possibility of catastrophic geologic processes such as Noah's flood, then all of a sudden I see different things when I look at the rock layers. Okay, and that allows that perspective. And I think maybe that's going to be my encouragement to you tonight, is to find out what paradigm you operate on and find out if there might be a possibility that the other paradigm might work for what you're looking at geologically. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight here. And so let's get going real quickly here. All right. Remember, we perfected this earlier to make sure everything was working just perfectly. And now all of a sudden it decides to go kaput. Okay, so we're going to be looking at that. I'm just going to go ahead and do this. I remember being at the Colorado School of Mines one time. And Colorado School of Mines is a good geological engineering type school, really well noted, really well noted. And I gave a presentation, Mary Jo and I did, on creation. We never mentioned a thing about the flood. It was just on the design and things like that. And I had a student in the back of the auditorium just prepping. He knew when we were getting ready to end the presentation. And I said, okay, that concludes this program. Any questions? Boom, hand goes up. He's been practicing for 5 minutes. Okay. And so that's when you don't want to call on, right? But I did. You don't believe in Noah and the flood, do you? I said, sure. Don't you? And he said, how did Noah get all those stinking animals on board that little tiny boat? I said, well, could you at least tell me how big the boat is? He said, well, I haven't looked into it, but certainly they could not have fit. I said, well, how about telling me how many animals had to go on board that boat? He said, I guess I haven't looked into that either, but I know they couldn't fit. I basically said, you're trying to say that an unknown number of animals can't fit on board a boat of unknown size. Come on, let's do some calculations, right? And went through some calculations, and I realized that this student was suffering basically from this particular concept that he must have seen in some cartoon. And who knows where all he saw it, but the little tiny boat with all the animals kind of squishing in there, right? It turns out that that's a bad concept of the ark. And if you actually look at it, you find out the ark was given the dimensions in the Bible, 300 cubits long, and that's really good if you have a cupid stick, okay? But most people don't have that, but it turns out that ark would have been at least 1.5 to 2 football fields in length. That's a big boat, isn't it? And if you do the calculations, you find out there's no problem whatsoever. So that objection goes away, okay? Yeah, you can get everything on only 1 of the 3 decks of the ark, by the way, or 3 floors of the ark. Anyhow, when you look at the idea of the flood, that's catastrophic geology, okay? Major catastrophic geology. The Bible talks about the whole world being covered by water, all right? And it's one of the most documented events in the biblical record, okay? And in fact, it's 3 full chapters, and then so many other books of the Bible talk about this as being a reality, okay? Even Jesus said it was a reality, all right? He even referred to it. And so I guess if it's okay for him to accept it, I can too, all right? So anyhow, so as we go along, we find out there is also much archaeological evidence of a flood coming from not just the Bible, but from other cultures as well. For instance, you've got Sumerian's king list that says, that actually names kings who reigned for long periods of time. And then a great flood came. Afterwards, the kings couldn't reign for as long, did they? They didn't reign, okay? So sounds like their lifespans were less. Well, if you look at the record as given in the biblical record, we find out that the patriarchs had the same thing. They were all living to be a good long age. And then all of a sudden the flood came, and then their lifespan started going down, 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 down pretty quickly. Okay. And so something must have occurred at the time of the flood. Now, as a scientist, I don't just dismiss that written record, because I'd have to dismiss that record plus records from around the world from different cultures saying much of the same thing. And I'd have to dismiss that. But I would think, I wonder what the conditions could have been like in order to allow that. That's how I would think about it as an open-minded scientist, okay? And so as I went along, I found out, yeah, there's a lot of other people talking about the flood. There's a couple of different accounts from the Babylonians. One of the more famous one is the Gilgamesh epic, right? And they talk about an ark, okay? Animals taken on board that boat, a bird sent out during the flood, ark landed on a mountain, and a sacrifice offered. Those are elements and key elements of the biblical account of the flood. And so it's so close in that regard that people have said, well, maybe the Bible was borrowed from the Gilgamesh epic. Why do they always say the Bible is the one being borrowed, right? It's just a bias there, I believe, is what it is. But then they think also the Gilgamesh might be older. Well, the problem is this. We know that when things were written down, but when you look at right at the beginning of the book of Genesis, you have these different accounts. And you say, there's a phrase that is repeated half a dozen times anyhow. It says, these are the generations of, then it gives a patriarch. These are the generations of Adam. You know what that word and that reference, generations of, probably means? According to Dr. Henry M. Morris, it's actually meaning it's a signatory. These are the records that were kept by such and such patriarch. And these are the records that were kept by, let's go to another one, Seth, another one, Noah. Records kept. And then Moses puts them together. Okay, that's what it kind of looks like. And I'm not going to say that Moses didn't write them down, he did. In fact, they're called the books of Moses, aren't they? And so he must have had some kind of reason to put them together, and God directing him to do it is what I would think. And so I believe that would be the earliest account. Then the Gilgamesh is copied from some of those accounts, or at least from the people talking about that flood. So that's what I would look at. Well, not only that, we find out there's a problem with the Gilgamesh epic. Their ark is in the shape of a cube. How would you like to ride around on real rough seas for a year in an ark like that? You're going to be tumbling all over, aren't you? Another one of the Babylonian ones actually says the ark was in the shape of a can, like a tin can. Man, I get seasick in a canoe. Yeah. So can you imagine rolling around in a squirrel cage for a year? It's gonna be bad news. What I like about so many different records, some of the details. We're going to get to that in a little bit, but when you look at even the Chinese language, it's a pictorial type of language, so their word for boat is made up of smaller pictures, and these pictures are 8 mouths in a vessel. So what? Well, unless you realize there were 8 people who went through the flood. Noah, his wife, 3 sons, daughter-in-laws. There were 8 people altogether. Now, is that coincidental? Not according to, say, that book right there, Discovery of Genesis, how basically the truths of Genesis are actually preserved in the Chinese language. That is an older book, but there are other books too, saying exactly the same thing. There's a couple of them right there. And so I'd recommend you get those if you really are interested in it, because it's not just the boats they're talking about, but all the major events mentioned in the book of Genesis, all the way from creation through the flood, are represented in the Chinese language in their characters. And in fact, they even worship the supreme God who was over all of the other gods in the original ancient Chinese. And these books you can read and find out about it. You know, there are over 270 flood legends that were recorded a number of years ago from around the world. And they each have a boat, people going on that board, and many of or on board that boat. Many of them actually taking animals on it. Okay, that's 270 flood legends. Now, the fact that they're so similar in basic structure tells me that each of these cultures are remembering it because it was passed down to them, whether it was written or oral. They remember that, but now they're telling it in their own culture, their own boat, what they use, etc. But you know, there's also another book that just recently came out just this year, and it's called Echoes of Ararat, and it's a collection of over 300 flood legends, strictly from North and South America. Again, the same pattern, the same sort of commonality between them, indicating they know about something, okay? At least it was handed down. And these flood legends that I'm telling you about are from places where they never had missionary activity. No missionary activity in many of those. So somehow or another, they still know the basic, don't they? Possibly because they all separated from the same group of people after the flood. That's what I would have to say. All right, now, there's a difference between Noah's account and so many of the other ones, and that is the detail. A lot of people say, oh, Noah's thing, that was just mythology. It's a good story, you know, fairy tale. But stop and think for a minute. How do most legends or fairy tales or myths start? Once upon a time, in a far distant land, right? Yeah, that's not what this one does. This one actually has specific dates, like in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month. That's nailing it down. That's specific, isn't it? And it says, all of the, on that same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. What is that telling me? There are 2 sources of water being identified here as well, okay? This is detail. None of the other accounts have that type of detail to it. So it tells me that this is probably not just a story, it's Noah's ship log. He is writing this down as it is occurring, because as you look a little bit further, you find out the start of the flood. Oh, they find out the ark grounded on the mountain, the tops of the mountain visible in the 10th month, birds sent out in the 11th month, and then the face of the ground was actually visible on the year 2. And then Noah was told to leave the ark finally when? The second year, the second month on the 27th of that month. That's detail, isn't it? He's writing it down. Okay, he's probably got his iPhone out there and he's typing it in there, right? Something like that. Maybe he's on the timbers of the ark. I don't know for sure, but it's a detail that sets that account above all of the rest of the accounts in my research. Okay. By the way, the flood was not just a little bit of rain. It says the windows of heaven opened. Wonder what that looks like. It's hard saying, but I bet you that's a lot of water. And then the fountains of great deep opened up. That's again cataclysmic. Now, if you're going to cover the whole world with water, you're not going to have anything to stop the currents. So there's more catastrophe ahead other than just the sources of the water here. So I'm going to say that flood was a worldwide global event. You know, a lot of people say, who even accept Noah's Ark, there's a lot of people says that it was just a local one. It killed just the people in the Mesopotamian region. Okay, I hear that all the time. But the problem is, that's not the biblical record. When you look at it, why have a great big boat the size of the ark, 1.5 to 2 football fields in length, if it's just a local flood? Okay, you don't need that. And not only that, there's inclusive language of destruction. All the flesh perish from under heaven. Okay, that's pretty conclusive or pretty inclusive. And then, except for what was in that boat. And so when you look at it, why have birds on board that ark? No, it took birds. If it's a local event, they just fly away a little ways, couldn't they? And then the tops of the tallest mountains recovered. Okay, I can't say that the mountains were the same height as we have them today. We do know that, for instance, the whole range where Everest is located is still rising. And so, Daryl, what you need to do is go climb Mount Everest now before it gets any higher. Okay? Yeah, we need to do that. All right, so here's where a skeptic has a heyday. We don't have enough water on planet Earth to cover the tallest mountain. Well, that is assuming that Everest was as tall at the time of the flood as it is now. It's still rising. And not only that, there is an answer given in Psalms 104 in the Bible. And that answer is that the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down. Yeah, we have tall mountains, but we also have Mariana's Trench. It's about, what is that, about 7 miles deep. Let's fill in the trenches. Let's take a giant iron, push down the mountains, and look at just what we have in the oceans today. How much water would we have to totally inundate planet Earth if we make the whole world kind of more like a soccer ball? It turns out we'd have enough water that would be 1.5 miles deep of water worldwide. Now that's a lot of water, isn't it? And so, okay, so the Bible seems to answer a lot of it. Although, when you look at Everest, there's another clue here. When you look at the tallest mountains, look at the very top summit of Everest. And some of the other taller mountains. Those are rock layers that are put down by water. They're called sedimentary layers, okay? They're put down by moving water. And so even the tallest mountains have sedimentary layers that have fossils in them that used to swim in the ocean. Now that does not prove the flood. It gives you circumstantial evidence. All it proves is that mountain was underwater at one time, okay? And those layers now got pushed up to the present position. So I might agree with any other geologist. Yeah, it was underwater. I might disagree with the time frame. How long does that take? How long does it take to push up that mountain? Is it millions of years, or can it happen more rapidly? And I say it could probably happen rapidly. Okay. And so besides that, there's another source of water, perhaps. This is just a week ago, roughly. As an article came out, it's actually mentioning and basically confirming an earlier research that I had studied in 2014. Okay, and what it was, they have found a diamond in Zimbabwe, way down deep, like 2,100 feet deep in their mine. It's a long ways underground, by the way. Okay, and but it was a little different than other diamonds in its weight. It was different. So they found out it had water in it, number one, a water diamond. But then it also had an impurity, which in geology and a crystal, we call it an inclusion. Okay, an inclusion. That inclusion, they were able to use spectrometry to be able to find out what kind of mineral it is. And they found out it is a mineral called ring woodite. All right, now this is like an olivine for you geologists out here. It's an olivine type material, but it is actually hydrated. And so that's where the water is coming from, okay? And this particular inclusion was actually encased as this diamond pipe went deep from the mantle, probably even the boundary between the upper and lower, and was shot up like that quickly to make diamonds. That's where our kimberlite deposits are. That's where our diamond deposits are made. That is a catastrophic event when that occurs, by the way. So diamonds mean you have to get it from very deep pressure and release that pressure suddenly. So are you with me on that? Okay, so something catastrophic is going on there at the same time. But this particular ring woodite sweats. If it loses some of its pressure, it'll give up that water, okay? It gives up that water. And so you figure out how much ring woodite is in the mantle, and it turns out that the total amount that you can actually calculate is 6 times the amount of water that is in all of the oceans today. Think about that. That's a lot of water, isn't it? Could that be some of the source of the fountains of the Great Deep? Possibly, I don't know for sure. Okay, I wasn't there, I didn't see it, in other words, okay? Anyhow, so that's very important. You can look up that article, but again, some people say, oh, that was old news. No, it was new news because it's actually a different diamond. It was a larger one that they can actually test, okay? And but it did confirm earlier research. Now, think about this for one moment. As we're talking about mantle material, think about the current model for continental drift, okay? It's called the plate tectonics, and the plate tectonics has, you have oceanic crust, which is extremely dense, diving underneath the continental crust and being what's called subducted underneath the continent, okay? That's the subduction model. Now, what happens if instead of that thing going real slowly, like it is right now, which is very important, by the way, because it keeps the oceans fresh. It's in a circulation pattern. It keeps it fresh. And so what happens now, if you speed it up a little bit, just cause something to speed it up. All of a sudden, when you speed it up, it's going to cause more friction. That's going to produce heat. That's going to make the mantle in that area easier to penetrate. And so now this thing was going hard to get underneath there. Now it goes a lot easier. As it goes faster, it gets more heat. It goes faster and faster, it'll get even more heat. And so that would be called runaway subduction because you can't stop it when it gets to a certain point. Now, the question is, was that actually occurring? This model actually was presented by Dr. John Baumgartner. He was considered the top geophysicist in the world. and even called that in Time magazine in an interview. They called him that, okay? And yeah, he was working for the Los Alamos labs, using all those big computers and everything, and he did computer modeling of that and realized this could happen. And geologists today are actually starting to embrace that because this model explains some things in geology that we had a hard time explaining before. And for you geologists, that is the transgressive and regressive sea type deposits, okay? And what caused all those things, in other words. This one is given a model for it that actually can work, all right? But John Baumgartner says the only problem is with that, it doesn't happen slowly. All of a sudden it gets going, it's gonna go. And so anyhow, that's something interesting when we talk about California falling into the ocean, right? And you know, yep. It might, I could speak about that, but I'd rather not. Anyhow, so what happens, by the way, what happens if you raise sea level? What happens if your sea level is raised? Okay, by the melting of the glaciers. Is that a good thing or bad thing? In one way, it could be a good thing. It might clean up politics in Washington, D.C., because it's going to drown everything along coastal margins all over the world, isn't it? So who knows? Duration of the flood, according to the biblical record, is over 1 year. That's how long Noah was on the ark, wasn't it? And that is a proof that it was a worldwide one. Or you might look at the rainbow, promise the rainbow God gave. You know, I was going to say there wasn't going to be another flood like that, right? Or was it a local flood? God would not keep his promise. Why? Because we've had a lot of local floods, even in the last year, right? We've had them. And so this was a big one. It's very different from it. And also, when I look at geologic formations, you know what I see? I see it through a different lens than what I used to. I looked at it for millions and millions of years, not only laying down of the formations, but also in the erosion of those particular things, making canyons. I always had millions of year lenses on until I started seeing a different picture, okay? And it started to emerge. I never anticipated that, actually. So I see in a rock layer, I see evidence of catastrophe now in so many rock layers. This one's in California, Southern California. You find this whole ridge of actually what they are, water-worn boulders. And an earthquake cracked this mountain open so you can see what it is made out of, okay? Now that one boulder in the center is about the size of a large dump truck. Okay, a large dump truck. Water-worn boulders, that means it's been tumbled by water. All right, that sounds interesting. What kind of current moves a boulder the size of a dump truck? Not your average spring runoff, okay? It's a catastrophic deep current that's going to move these kind of boulders. Let's go to another spot. And you see layer after layer after layer of water-worn boulders, some of which are as big as the Jeep, okay? So what do you have? High velocity currents and pulsating at that. So you have a high velocity current, then you have a current that's not quite so fast, and you get the smaller rocks. Okay, the bigger rocks are put down by currents that are moving a lot of material, so they're pretty deep and pretty fast. And so you got one right after another going on here. Split Mountain, California. Catastrophic geology here. And think about it, if you were standing there, you would know how catastrophic those layers were forming right there. Here's the Anza-Borrega Desert, another spot not too far away. But look at this. These are water-worn boulder materials right here. It's actually forcing its way into the sandstone layers that you see on your right, like a fist into a layer cake. You see that? Now, that layer cake Must not have been in the oven that long, otherwise it would have been solid rock. According to standard geology, the sandstone layers on your right would have represented 100 million years. And there was a time in my career that I would have said, that's 100 million years. What do you do when you see this? You find out it actually bends the layers down and bends it up here. These were still soft when this was happening. Otherwise, that could not have happened. Okay, so we see catastrophic thrusting going on in there in layers that were still soft. So if they're still soft, they can't be 100 million years old because of the type of cementing that you're looking at here. That'd be solid concrete in a very short period of time. All right, Mount St. Helens blew its lid back in 1980. That's where the main eruption was. It was a gorgeous spot to live for a while and have a fun time, go sailing in the boat, in the lake, etc. But then they noticed something about that mountain. It was beginning to bulge. 18, 40 feet per day. And if you live near a mountain that's bulging towards you at 18 to 40 feet per day, what should you do? Run, get out of there, right? That's what you need to do. And the geologist said, hey, this mountain's becoming unstable, evacuate people. And most everybody evacuated except for a few diehards there. All right. But Mount St. Helens did erupt then, May 18th, 1980. Very important date. And everybody looks at that mountain and said, wow, it's amazing the size of this volcano. This was a big volcanic eruption, right? Well, we always think that. Big volcanic eruption. We lost a lot of mountain. You can see by that dotted line, but we gained a lot of knowledge as well. But you know what? Mount St. Helens was just a tiny little pop gun compared to other volcanoes. That little red dot next to the green one there, that little red dot, that's Mount St. Helens. Okay, that's Mount St. Helens. Now look at the Crater Lake, which is the first, the next one, the yellow one next to it. That's how much bigger Crater Lake was. But hold on, that was just a small one compared to the eruptions at Yellowstone National Park. Look at those big ones. The Yellowstone one would then 10,000 times larger in ejectites, you might call it, than Mount St. Helens. 10,000. The only safe place to observe that would be from the moon, probably. All right, well, maybe from the shuttle, that might work. But again, that was a monster eruption. And yeah, Mount St. Helens gave us a lot of information. And by the way, Mary Jo and I give tours of Yellowstone National Park. Okay, we love showing people this crater of Yellowstone, just one of those craters, 45 miles in diameter. Okay, that's quite.
Is that how you get the data for how big those cubes are? Like, how do you know?
How do you know? You can actually measure the volcanic ash that was ejected from it and over the many different states. And you can figure out some of the amount that came from there. The ash from a specific volcano has a special type of, like a fingerprint of the composition. And so that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to look at the size of the crater of it. And in the middle of Yellowstone National Park, you had this big crater. Everything came out. Everything came out. And then all of a sudden the crater sunk. You see the crater rim today, 45 miles in diameter. Okay. And you find it's what's now called a collapsed caldera. And it's in that collapsed caldera where most of the beautiful features of Yellowstone National Park are found. All of the thermal hot springs, the geysers like Old Faithful, and some of the beautiful pools. Okay, so I enjoy giving field trips there. It's amazing kind of stuff you can actually see. And so that's how they know basically where it is. There was the ejectite actually in parts of the south was almost 3 feet deep. in the southern part of the United States, a long ways away, okay? And so, okay, so we have a lot of canyons. Look at that. All kinds of new layers were formed down below. We always thought layers took a long time to form, but no, these were all parts of one day or a couple of different days. That's all, every one of those layers that you see. It does not take long to make volcanic deposits and volcanic layers. I've been at Badlands. You know what they normally would tell you at Badlands if you went there tomorrow? It took millions of years to put down those layers. And you might ask the ranger, sir, didn't we see the same kind of layers deposited in one day at Mount St. Helens? You know what the answer would likely be? Well, Mount St. Helens was a special case. Well, maybe that was a special case too. But they might say, well, you can't get this kind of erosional pattern in a short time. It takes eons of time to make the erosion. Well, that wasn't the case either. Mount St. Helens had secondary steam blasts that produced steam pits from the shortest distance there is a quarter of a mile across. And it has the same badland topography. How long did that take? One afternoon. That's all. That's all it took. Here's a big canyon. We all know it takes millions of years to form canyons, right? At least that's what I was taught. But when we actually find what happened in Mount St. Helens, we found out that canyon, which goes for 8 miles back there, was carved out mostly in one day by a catastrophic flow that was coming down from Mount St. Helens when the glacial ice, this is a couple years later, actually flowed down through there, and you could actually see boulders floating on this volcanic debris. You see big old oil tankers and gasoline tankers floating on this river of volcanic debris and boulders. That's how dense it was, and that could carve out a canyon very quickly. So we have to understand that, okay? National Geographic said it this way: you'd expect a hard rock canyon to be thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years old. That's how long it would take, says Peter Frenzen, monument scientist. But this was cut in less than a decade, less than 10 years. And the bulk of it was one day, by the way. Okay? No, canyons don't take long if the conditions are just right. A catastrophic viewpoint with a lot of water is going to really make the condition just exactly right. And that was just a little bit of water. Compare that with what happened if there was a worldwide flood with water 1,000 feet deep and 150 mile per hour currents. You can do the calculations and find out that's what you would have, okay? That would do a lot of damage to whatever geologic formations are around, okay? There would be tidal waves, there'd be all kinds of things happening during a flood like that. Okay, now I'm going to give you a geology principle. So you can take this one home, okay? And you can write it down if you want. You can quote me on it if you want. But here it is. Most of these layers that you see is petrified mud. It's mud that's been solidified by chemicals, okay? And when you see petrified mud, think flood. Simple, okay? I look at that from whether it be Bryce Canyon National Park. I see the same thing at Colorado National Monument, which I just happen to live at the base of that, okay? And it's a big area. You can go drive 22 mile around there. It's amazing formations that you get to see, or you can hike in it and you can get a close-up view. We also give tours to the Colorado National Monument, okay? And so we're glad to take you there. One of the things I like to show people is the canyon within a canyon at the Colorado National Monument. Now, I've been told that it takes millions of years to carve those canyons, but I see two things here. I see, number one, a broader canyon, and then when the water begins to channelize, a canyon within the canyon. I can tell you that there's a lot of water. We've gone through there one time. Where's all the debris? It's gone. And Then a canyon within the canyon, that would be the cutting down later. Okay, two different events. Well, they would all be occurring not simultaneously, but subsequently. All right, let's go to another spot. Dry Falls in eastern Washington. I love taking students to the spot. But what you see is a dry waterfall. There's not water going over the top of it today. There's some seep coming in from below, making that lake, but there's no waterfall. And how can you imagine a waterfall here? That's flat as a pancake on top. So if you have a waterfall, that means your water depth from horizon to horizon's got to be pretty deep. Okay, it's got to be. So how would they think there was a big old waterfall there? Well, that is now standard geology today. There was a lot of water. And they used to just kind of laugh at the idea that there was a huge flood of some kind of water. J. Harlan Bretz tried to convince people. And finally, they associated the evidence that he was seeing with shorelines of a lake. You can see the lines up there about where the M is. That's Missoula, Montana. Okay, that's the M for Missoula. And basically, there would have been a big lake that would have contained, according to standard geology, 500 cubic miles of water, probably dammed up by 1 ton of the glacier coming down. Okay. The depth at Missoula would have been 900 feet deep. At the dam, at the ice, it would have been 2,000 feet deep. Now, as you engineers in here know that ice is not the best thing to make a dam on a big lake, okay? It moves and breaks, okay? And sure enough, it collapsed according to standard geology today. And the entire Lake Missoula, and you can see it on this, the blue color there, took out the dam, then took out the lake below called Glacial Lake Columbia, and all that water went downstream. All right, and here would be the lake on your right, and this would be the inundation that occurred in what's called channeled scablands across eastern Washington. This is an area of 100 miles by 200 miles. And then you also have the Columbia Gorge that was probably deepened by almost 400 feet through solid volcanic basalt in that one period of flooding. And how long would that take to drain a lake like that? Dams don't break slowly, okay? When they go, they really go fast. And so we're looking at, according to standard geology, 24 to 48 hours, that water is now gone. It's going all the way down. And yes, you do have a great big waterfall over here at Missoula, Lake Missoula waterfall and Dry Falls. And I can hardly draw a picture of it to give you an idea, but from clear across horizon to horizon, you have that, but you have a lot of channels. In fact, here is one other channel from Dry Falls looking downstream. This canyon wasn't there 24 hours before, or 48, okay? It's 6 miles wide, 22 miles long, up to 700 and 900 feet deep. That was one event. Time is not the hero of the plot, okay? Not for something like this, okay? And another spot, Palouse Falls, 182-foot waterfall. David, you like to kayak that? No, I wouldn't either, but somebody did. Look, Palouse Falls kayak on Google or on YouTube, you'll see it. Broke one paddle. It was interesting. But look at the big plunge pool. That means there's a lot more water. And you find out how much water? Well, the whole hillside around, rounded hills. Oh, why? Water running over the top of it, rounding those hills, ripping up the material, dropping it down below. That's what you see there. And so Palouse Falls, here's the canyon below that. And by the way, that particular canyon at Palouse Falls, was 1,300 feet deep. Okay, probably not there prior to this collapse of Lake Missoula. So that's the Lake Missoula flood. You look down below, you find fields in the Quincy Basin in Washington. You find all these boulders. They're with a group of students here, and we're looking at that. If you drill down in that basin, go down 300, 400 feet, you're going to still encounter great big boulders. Now, some of the boulders, I'll point them out to you real quick. You see boulders here of granite. You can find great big basalt boulders. It was just cutting out just like that. Why? Because it's not just clear water, and a lot of it that is going over that falls. As soon as you start eroding, you've got sand now mixed with the water, now mixed with rock, cobble, and boulders, big ones, now being carried down through, helping the erosion of those canyons. So it's a cement slurry after a while, a very wet cement slurry going down through there. I see the boulders sometimes left over. And if you're on a field trip with me, I'll go, boulders, because I love seeing those things. Why? It tells me there was a lot of catastrophic movement at that time. This is near Escalante, Utah, and there you see the boulder fields, okay? You see it. Where are they? They're on top, and there's a canyon on this side and a canyon on that side. So something happened, carving out that canyon, probably associated with those boulders. That's what I would have to say. Here's Twin Falls, Idaho, boulders again. All right, here you go. Well, look at those are big boulders here. And some of them are the size of our friend, the Galbraith's Suburban. Those are big boulders. And finally, they associated those boulders with the shorelines of an ancient lake. The shorelines of an ancient lake, and that lake is called today Ancient Lake Bonneville. Okay, Ancient Lake Bonneville. And that lake would have been about 1,000 feet deeper than the present Great Salt Lake that surrounds Salt Lake City. And it would have been approximately 1/3 the size of the state of Utah, which is fairly close to the size of Minnesota. Okay, so that's a big lake, isn't it? All right, that suddenly catastrophically drained. And when it did, it went north into Idaho and went across through Boise, Twin Falls, etc., carving out the Snake River Canyon. The signpost today at the Snake River says that waterfall and that canyon was not here 30 days before this event. It's here now. Okay, that's a signpost. That's standard geology today. Where are those big boulders? On top of the canyon. That means the water depth was several hundred feet above the canyon, even here. Okay, that's a long ways from Salt Lake. Okay, and so as I look at it, we also find the same thing in other parts of the world. This is actually in Siberia, and this is out of the science publication, and you can read that there if you want. Go get it. But that lake, that particular flood would have been 10 times the size of the Missoula flood. That's a lot of water, 10 times. Wave Rock in Australia, you can imagine the water rolling off of that, not millions of years of gradual erosion. This has happened and happened quickly, didn't it? That happened very quickly. All right, so time is not the hero of the plot. Catastrophe is mixed with a lot of water. So we see that as two big controls. Darwin floated on the along the coast of South America, and he saw what? Great big water channels. He saw the Santa Cruz River. They actually took a boat up there. And he said, oh, eons of time for this river to carve through that volcanic dark bluff there. Okay? No, eons of time. Well, he missed a few things. Like for instance, boulders on top of that ridge, as well as boulders way down below in the gravels. You can see them. And so he missed all that stuff. It probably should have noticed it, but he didn't. That boulders tells you there was a catastrophic flow of water at one time. Okay, that's what's going on. They're now associating this particular area way upstream where there was a big lake in Argentina. Okay, and now forming that particular thing. So when I see things like Colorado National Monument, and I live down there, guess what? I see a lot of water. Okay, I see evidence of flooding. I go to the Canyonlands National Park, and I'm looking at the Green River overlook here and some of the other overlooks. And what do I see? Huge amounts of water. In fact, I look across there from where I'm standing to where the bluffs are, all eroded away, 18 miles away. You think that's a lot of water? I think so. And a lot of deep water that's carving out this canyon. Today, there are two rivers go down there. They meet down below where this picture is. And eventually, one river comes back into the Colorado River and then eventually goes out to the ocean eventually. So a lot of water, but much more water in the past. That's what we see. All right, when I look at rock layers even, I see flooding. I see evidence of flooding all over. I see evidence of flooding in the catastrophic cutting of these particular canyons as well. Okay, the standard interpretation that it took millions of years of gradual erosion to carve that big canyon. I say, what if there was a great big lake upstream? And then what do? I want to go check it out. Is there evidence for it? Well, I live in Grand Junction, Colorado, which happens to be right there, or if you're looking at that screen, right in here, okay? I look at that as evidence and I say, wait a minute. Is there evidence in Grand Junction? Yeah. There are big shorelines around that you can actually see in different parts. And the entire Grand Valley where I live is an ancient lake bed. In fact, you can drill down and you find out there's up to 30 feet of lake bed deposits in that area. That goes all the way up and down that Grand Valley. And so what if that catastrophically drained? Notice that that little river and that Grand Canyon is very tiny compared to all of this. So I'm going to say maybe, I wasn't there, I didn't see it. Maybe it would have taken just a short time to form that canyon. Okay, the big boulders that I showed you, some of which are the size of a dump truck, downstream. Same type of material, yeah. Smoking gun here, it's a possibility. So maybe possibly weeks to carve out a good share of that Grand Canyon. And if you allow the mountains to rise up, remember that in Psalm 104, valley sinking down, water washing off of that, you're going to have canyons right there, aren't you? You're going to have a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Okay, let's go to another spot. Black Canyon, the Gunnison is only about an hour and a half from my house. And look at that big gash in the ground. If you were to take a flying leap from this rim right here, you drive over it and you go fast enough, you might be able to hit that river. 1,600 feet below. Okay, I don't think I want to try it. And I don't want to think I want to get on a motorcycle and try to jump this thing. Okay. But did that little river down there carve this big canyon? That's the standard interpretation. When I looked at it, I said, I see a different picture now. I would have agreed with it sometime, some years ago, but I see a different picture. I see possibly a tear fault. Now, time it. How long does it take to make a big canyon? Let's suppose we have a big earthquake. Here are the this rock layer right here. It's all holding together. Now you got a big earthquake. Got a big gash in the land. Did you time it? It doesn't take very long to make a canyon when you look at a tear fault. Okay? Doesn't take long at all. And now it captures the old Gunnison River. And it goes right down, takes a shortcut instead of going all the way around. I see evidence of that all over. Okay. And I go to Sierra Nevada mountains and I look at it. Beautiful scenery. But wait a minute, that looks like an island. This looks like a channel of water. My eyes start picking up on these things. because I have a different lens. I have a lens that allows for catastrophe, okay? And then I said, that looked like a channel. I wonder if there's evidence, and climb down that cliff. And guess what I find? All kinds of water sculpted volcanic basalt. Again, there was a lot more water flowing through here at one time. But that water that is now cement slurry, it's got to stop someplace. Death Valley, California, the lowest spot on the continental United States. There you see the dump right there. Okay, there it is. Boulders. I love it. Bunches and bunches of boulders. In fact, at there at Death Valley, they call this one Mosaic Canyon. What happened? This particular cement slurry carved out the canyon, and as it went through, it actually coated the sides of the canyon with the cement. Now it looks like a mosaic. And then a little bit further down, you can see the coating as it goes down, you see the dump of that material. Okay, a bunch of it right there. All right. Yeah, I see evidence of that all the time, but I see evidence that it was cut quickly. I see evidence of the layers being put down quickly in many places in the world. We're not going to get into all of that tonight, but people have said, oh, radioactive decay dating methods, that proves those layers are millions of years old. So your model can't be right. Well, how do you know they're accurate? You're always using them to date rocks of unknown age, correct? The only way we know is the date of rocks of known age. And that's been done a few times. Like Mount St. Helens had a recent volcanic lava dome built up. And when that was actually dated, it was 30 years after the original eruption. So it should be no more than 30 years old. The dates, 340,000 to 2.8 million years. Something's wrong, okay? Same thing happened in New Zealand. Same thing happened in Hawaii, but this time it was the minimum age they got on a recent volcanic lava flow after it cooled was 3 million up to 1 billion years. So my geologist ranger friend at the Grand Canyon, when I pointed that out, same thing at the Grand Canyon, recent volcanic lava flow, dated at least as old and up to twice as old as the rock layers underneath the canyon. He told me one year, your data's got to be wrong. I said, take a look. Showed him where to look and said, I'd be back. Okay. Well, I said, I'll be back. But the next year I was back, I saw the same ranger, same spot in the canyon, given the same ranger talk. I asked him the same question. He said, oh, you again. He said, but I found out you're 100% right. Why is he giving the same ranger talk? Okay. He said, I found out there's a good answer to the problem you brought up. What's that? He said, well, it has been shown that these methods are not accurate on recent events. True. If you can't trust them on rocks of known age to give you a reliable date, how do you rely on them to give you good results on rocks of unknown age? That would be my question for him, okay? So that's always a question you need to ask, isn't it? You might assume they're good on ancient rocks, but you don't know that, do you? All right, we see mass burial as well, okay? Mass burial, like for instance, whole clams like that. That tells you they were buried in very deep way. They didn't have time to dig their way out. And we see all kinds of those layers with those clams. That's rapid burial. In another spot we find in the Grand Canyon here, all of these nautiloid fossils, the long cigars, okay? Basically, a squid probably lived in those things, but there are lots of them down there and they're all oriented the same direction. And so I'm guessing there was water current in the middle of the red wall limestone that was supposed to be in a deep, calm ocean environment. It wasn't, okay? There was a water current there. Stacked, basically orienting all these fossils here. You want to talk? I do have a couple copies of the Grand Canyon guidebook. You can read about it. It's a wonderful guidebook. It's even better than taking me there because my laser pointer won't reach across that canyon. Okay, okay, but they can take the circle and show you exactly what you're looking at and why it's significant. We find mass burial of fossilized fish near Kimmerer, Wyoming, Fossil Butte National Monument. And what do we see? 365 fish on this one slab, not a fin out of place on the small fish, even the large fish the same way. And not only that, they have a palm frond that's 10 feet long. And with fish, no decay. What does that tell me? It was buried and buried rapidly, otherwise it would have decayed. Those fins were rotted, right? On the little fish. So how fast is this burial? Well, this guy is eating his lunch. Both of them got trapped. That's rapid burial, okay? Catastrophic type of stuff going on. It's Dinosaur National Park, 92 different dinosaurs, not different types, but different dinosaurs, ripped apart and deposited here. That's catastrophic deposition here at Dinosaur National Park. All right. You know, I look at rock layers. I'm going to be summing up here pretty quick. I look at rock layers and I get hungry. I look at layer after layer of rocks and I think of layers of pancakes. Okay. Yeah. And I think about the layers with blueberries in it, the syrup over the butter. Oh man, do I get hungry. Yeah. Yeah. Hungry geologist. Okay. But I look at each of the layers that I'm seeing as a pancake pour. Okay, a pancake pour. But what do you do when you see one petrified tree cutting through all of those pancakes? If those pancakes were millions of years old, that tree would have rotted. Nope. This particular picture, the roots are abruptly broken off. It looks like that was ripped up and planted in these layers that are being put down quickly from catastrophic geologic processes. All right, where is that? There it is, Eastern United States. You can see some of these trees going through those multiple layers right there. There's a whole bunch of them and a couple more sites of it. There's one going through there. There's a couple more over to the side. Again, catastrophic burial, no rotting going on whatsoever. It's in the United States, it's Nova Scotia, Germany, Australia, all over. Again, probably similar type of conditions, maybe the same flood. Okay. Now, here's another one. What do you do when you notice a rock layer that emanates from a layer way down deep, but it pokes its way up through, somehow it's fluidizing, pokes its way up through all of the pancakes, all the way up through the butter, okay? What do? You realize that those pancakes were still yet soft, and so was the bottom layer. Otherwise, it would not happen. And so, according to standard geology, here's what I would have thought at one time, the layers here, including the Entrada sandstone, were supposedly put down over 30 at least million years. That would have been solid rock, solid. And this would not happen. This tells me they were still soft when it occurred, and there's hydraulic activity. You push down here, stuff squirts out over here. And in Kodachrome Basin in Utah, you find 165 of those particular things. And it's not the only place in the world you find it. Okay, 165 of them. You can see one poking up way in the distance here. Here's another one next to my van, the great big sandstone one. Again, poking up through all those layers of pancakes. I love taking students to this one right here, and you can actually see it. It looks like it was squeezed like toothpaste coming out of the tube. All right, that's what it looks like. You can actually see the marks where it's coming up and scraping the sides. So that's, again, Kodachrome Basin going through multiple layers of geologic history. Doesn't happen that way, okay? That fits with the flood. You know, I love talking about this one here, but not broadly right now. Look at that sandstone layer. It's above the Pikes Peak granite, Colorado Springs area, okay? It's right above it. But something happened. There's one type of rock on the bottom and then sedimentary on top. It's what's called an unconformity. That means it's not the same stuff. Let's put it that way. All right. Somehow the stuff below got planed off. The sandstone got deposited on top of it. But that's interesting because that sandstone doesn't stop at Colorado Springs. In fact, you find that same sandstone at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. It's called the Top Heat Sandstone down there. It's just above the inner gorge of the Grand Canyon. Okay, it's there. But look at that. It has blocks of rock in it. It wasn't wind deposited, I'll tell you that much. Okay, it wasn't. That's what they originally said about Top Heats, but no, it's water deposited. But that particular block of material is called Shinumu quartzite. It comes from below. So somehow or another, as this is being put down, there are currents, there are eddies like water volcanoes plucking up material like this and depositing it somewhere else. And that's what we see right here. Now, that Top Heat sandstone doesn't stop there either. You also find it going clear down into Mexico, all of the lightest colored in the drawing there. All the way to the eastern seaboard, you find it clear north of Greenland. You also find it's on the top of Moran Peak in the Grand Tetons. And that's interesting. Bottom of the Grand Canyon, top of the peak, mountains rose up, okay? And so there was no local flood. This is a catastrophic event that's putting this thing down over broad areas. At least continental here, okay? Massive limestones, same thing that we see, all right? And then near Colorado Springs again, at Glen Eyrie, this is a layer of a certain type of formation. It's standing on end because the Pikes Peak the layers were put down, Pikes Peak uplift, pull these layers up with it. Now it's standing on end. You go into the main part of Colorado Springs and east, it flattens back out and goes all the way across eastern United States, but it doesn't stop there. It goes across the ocean. It doesn't stop in the Atlantic. It goes across the ocean. You now find it as the White Cliff and Dover, cliffs of Dover there. But you also find it in Israel and Spain. And now they say they are finding it, same formation, in Australia. Are you talking about some major big monster pancake here, aren't you? You are. That's a catastrophic worldwide event, not something local that's going on here. So I'm going to say the most documented event in the biblical history is the flood. 3 full chapters devoted to that. But you also find much archaeological evidence worldwide. You find worldwide geologic formations as well, all indicating the same flood. And so, who's the hero of the plot? Is it time? It might take some time for certain formations, but not that much. What am I seeing? The hero of the plot is cataclysmic water. You can do in an instant with a lot of water what would take millions of years with a little bit of water. Okay, again, different lens, isn't it? And again, I have to admit that I used to have the lens thinking everything had to be millions of years. And all of a sudden I started shifting my paradigm based upon research. Okay, and I realized, whoa, I think there's more of a catastrophic picture here. And that's what I encourage people to look at now. Look for the catastrophic nature of the geologic record, okay? And so if it was Noah's flood that's responsible, I can't prove that that's what caused it. I can just show catastrophe, but the smoking gun is Noah's flood, okay? As recorded in the Bible and all around the world as well. I say it's a reality. And as a geologist, if that's a reality, I better take the rest of that book called the Bible seriously. I better, And it talks about other judgments coming too. But it also is the one that Parnell will tell you about. It's another catastrophe, but there's a way to escape it. When God sends a catastrophe or judgment, he always has a way to escape it. You can do it. You look at the history in the Bible. It's his grace showing up. Okay? It is. And this time it's through recognizing and embracing what Jesus Christ did 2,000 years ago on the cross for you, for me. Okay? That's grace. It's amazing. Take somebody that could care less about him and then all of a sudden, bam, he shows you great, marvelous things. That's what I love seeing. So it also tells me the whole thing from a geologist standpoint. I see the reliability of what the Bible says in some of the most contested chapters of the Bible, actually, and I find reality there. Okay, so we hope you can go out in the field, enjoy, look for boulders. Okay, look for those boulders, and not only that, you'll see evidence of creation, and so look for that. Discover creation. Don't worship those rocks. Okay, worship the one who created it. Okay, that's what we need to do. I'm going to invite Parnell up and Mary Jo, and we're going to take a time of question and answer right now. And while he's doing that, come join us. Feel free to come join us on our Yellowstone tour. We've got 2 tours scheduled for next summer. You might really enjoy it. It's an eye opener when you actually see what's going on there. Wonderful spot to go. We're also doing a Costa Rica tour, looking at the design. Oh, your eyes lit up. You want to go? Uh-oh, you work on your dad. Okay. Anyhow, what do we see? Oh, amazing evidence of creation. And that's March 5 through 14. That's a couple of the tours we're going to be leading this coming year. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks everyone for coming. I wanted to kind of make a point based on what you were presenting, and I don't always listen very well, so I apologize if you already clarified this. Maybe it was there, but for some people that are like me that don't always listen as closely, I think it's worth adding some detail about Dave's presentation. So why was he focusing on these inland lakes? What do you guys think? What's the point of all these inland lakes that he was focusing on and how they carved these canyons? Like, I saw people leaving and I was wondering to myself, are they thinking that that's all there is to it, that just because there's these little events that somehow proves a worldwide flood, and then they just decided to leave? Maybe I'm wrong, maybe they just had to go, but thank you for staying, because I want to point out, I don't know, I didn't see anyone answer my question. So why is Dave talking about these inland lakes? Well, if there was a worldwide flood, the Bible says the waters receded off the land, right? It went down and down and down, and they came out of the boat, they came back on the land. Well, you're gonna have a lot of inland lakes created by this receding of this worldwide flood. You're gonna have captured water all over the world in giant lakes that's gonna be just kept in place by these dams Dave talked about, these earth dams, these ice dams. And so that would be the source of these giant lakes after the flood, that then when they gave way, you also have these materials after the flood laid down that are soft still. It hasn't been that long since those waters receded, that when they break, it's cutting through these canyons quick. There's not even hard rock potentially to cut through, it's soft rock. So I don't know if that helps you, but part of his presentation was to point out that these canyons could have formed, and in standard geology, as many of them are already agreed to have formed very rapidly in this manner, but that those inland lakes would have been present as a result of the receding of the worldwide flood. All right, was that helpful? So there you go. I just quick want to say that I'm Pastor Parnell Mahoney once again, and I heard the gospel, and it gave me hope. I didn't grow up as a Christian, but I got my degree here in science at this university when I was a junior. Someone asked me about, if I had a relationship with God, and I said, well, I believe in God, but I don't believe in the Bible. I believe it's full of contradictions. I don't believe in Jesus Christ. But somehow this pastor got me into a Bible study. Danger, because that's a lot of people won't read the Bible, but if you're going to read it, you're going to encounter something supernatural. You're going to encounter amazing. It's called the Word of God. So I started meeting with this guy in my apartment. I was tired of partying. I was tired of trying all the pleasure that the world had to offer, and I was not satisfied with anything. There was a itch that I couldn't scratch, and I didn't know how to get to it. But when I started hearing this message of Jesus and his life, it was compelling to me. I didn't think it was a fairy tale. It spoke to my heart. I thought, this is amazing. It gave me hope. And I thought, but is it true? It sounds credible, but how do I know? Is it true? And I met Jesus in my apartment one night on campus when I was 19 years old. I'm 44 years old now. But ever since I met him in my apartment, I repented of my sins. I asked him to save me. I put my faith in him, death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. I said, if you'll save me, I'll follow you forever. He changed my life. My heart was changed. My life was changed. And after that event, I went back to church later. I started going to church now. And at church, they started challenging evolution to me. Now I was already an evolutionist. Okay. I was like, what do you mean evolution is not true? So they said, well, it's not in the Bible, So I went back to Genesis and I was looking at it. I'm like, oh, you're right. It's not there, So one of our motivations, these things, is to help you to believe in Scripture, to believe in the Word of God, that we have evidence in the earth to show you there was a worldwide flood. The Bible actually talks about these times that we're in and says that people will deny special creation. It says mockers will come in the last days. This is what Peter said in 2 Peter 3. Mockers will come in the last days, and they will be living according to their lusts. So they're living for this world, and they don't want to be accountable to a creator who has absolute moral expectations of us. And your own heart tells you that there's moral expectations on your life. We don't want an absolute creator. And so we're going to mock special creation. We're going to mock that God created everything in 6 days. We're going to mock that there was a worldwide flood. It says they will deny that by the word of God, the heavens were of old and the earth was formed out of water and by water. That's talking about Genesis 1, one of the days of creation. It says he separated the waters and he brought forth dry land and he called it earth. That's what Peter's talking about. They will deny that by his word, he created everything. And by his word, by that same word, he says he flooded the ancient world, a judgment on the corruption of men was so violent in the ancient world, so corrupt that God judged the whole world. And so they will deny that, and they will say, where's this promise of Jesus coming back? And, everything continues as it has since the beginning of creation. We look at that, we see uniformitarian geology, just this idea of an ancient earth. We deny special creation and the flood. And it says that mankind won't be ready for the return of God, where he's going to judge it in one final judgment. He's going to issue another command, and it's going to happen rapid, just like he formed the earth in 6 days and the world, the universe, and he flooded it in a very short period of time by a command. He's also going to issue a command, and he's going to judge the world in the end, and we're all going to come and stand before God. Are you going to be ready? We want you to look at the world and see it for what it really is. Look at these canyons and see the judgment of mankind in the entire earth, and understand that God's serious about your sin, and understand that Jesus took it for you. But if you're just going to deny him, you're going to die in your sin. You're going to jump out of that plane of death, and you're going to fall to the ground, and sin's going to kill you if you don't put on that parachute, which is Jesus Christ. So we're here to say, put on that parachute, trust in him, and trust in your whole Bible. If you're a Christian, you can trust in your whole Bible. You can take Genesis literally. Moses thought it was literal. Jesus thought it was literal. I think Jesus knows what he's talking about. He saved me. I'll tell you from my perspective, he knows what he's talking about. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Thanks for listening. We're going to turn it over to Q&A. If you want to jump right into science, great. Whatever questions you want, you can pose, and we'll see where this goes. Thanks.
I think your hand was up first.
Yeah. So this one's for you, Dave. As a geologist, what's your thoughts on global warming, if it exists or doesn't exist? Because I'm on the stance that it doesn't exist. I don't
Okay.
believe in it, and I don't believe sea levels are rising. In fact, I don't think that it could ever rise so much to take over our earth, because that's why we have rainbows, and God said that would never happen again. So, and so the fact is that they keep saying the waters are rising, yet all these cities that are on the coast are still there.
Good point. Good point.
So what's your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts on global warming and all the cities that are on the coast are still there. So is it really happening? Is the global warming true? There is a wonderful website that you might want to look at. And that would be cornwallalliance.org. And he is one guy that has done huge amounts of research on global warming. The thing that he says is, yeah, there are periods of time that things are warming up. And then he also points out that, but it's not man-made. And he has the data to back up what he says, and for sure. And it goes up, it fluctuates. There was a very much warm period of time during the Middle Ages. Okay, there was. And but you can actually look at the growth, things like that. But we have that. But it was not caused by automobiles. Okay, I can tell you that much. And so I think it's overrated. I think it's, I hate to say it, this is a University of Minnesota, and I'm sure there used to be, I'm not sure if it's still here, but there used to be a club at the University of Minnesota, and it was called Minnesotans for Global Warming. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But at the, that was the actual club. But yeah, we could, it's not going to be that drastic, but if you melted all of the glaciers at one time, then there will be a massive amount of water in the oceans, and it would take out some of the coastal areas. Okay.
But Mount Everest is still going up, they tell us. So
Yeah.
the mountains are still rising. What about the continents?
They could be too.
Now,
Yeah,
I mean, if
that
you
can
had
happen.
been in Florida during this recent hurricane, I understand Sanibel Island is only like 4 feet above sea level. Of course, you're gonna get water coming across places like that that are really, you know, low-lying areas. But I don't think we're in too much danger of all being flooded here.
Years ago, I was giving a lecture, and somebody came up to me, says, I have done a tremendous amount of research. The big thing back then was the ozone layer and the hole in the ozone. Okay. And he basically was saying, I was doing research on it, and I turned in my research and went through the government agencies. When it came out, it had nothing to look like a research that I submitted to them. He was pretty irate with that. Okay. And as a also somebody that used to teach university statistics. Okay. One of the things I looked at was some of the things, and I realized there was a problem with some of the reporting that was done relating to the hole in the ozone layer. One, if you're going to report it and try to get a statistical analysis over 70 or 7 decades, then your data better have the same month, same day that you're looking at the readings, right? But they weren't. And you find out that the readings was 1 month here, 1 month here, 1 month over here, 1 month over here. And guess what? Every year there is a pattern where the ozone layer thins over the Arctic area. It does that every year. Did it this year, I'm sure. Okay, but so basically, if you look at the time frame where it's the thinnest here, now where it's the thickest over here, and you chart that, oh, month by month, so it's looking like and every year or every decade you're reporting differently, you're going to get a different result from your research. And then what the actual data might really read, if you're being, I'm not sure if it's honest with the data or careful with the data. Okay, you have to understand that. Okay, so did I answer it enough?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
all right, next question.
Yeah, so early on, you talked about the archaeological evidence with, I believe it was Sumeria, correct? With
Yeah, I
with
mentioned the
flood?
Sumerian king
Yeah.
list.
Right, so, and then a couple others. So, right, the Bible explicitly states when talking about the flood, that it killed all humans on earth, with the exception of Noah and his family, right? So if that's explicitly true, how come we have records predating the flood, continuing through the flood and after? Can you like expand on that a little bit?
Can you guys repeat the question? We're recording, so we want to repeat the question, so make sure that people listening online can hear the question. So go ahead, Mary Jo, you have some, or Dave.
Okay, yes, the question is, we have, I talked about the Sumerian king list, talking about ancient, how the people at one time lived a lot longer. They reigned many years, then came a great flood. After the flood, there was a lot less, they lived shorter periods of time, basically. And that fit what the biblical record said. So the question is, how could that be when we have records talking about some pre-flood from a different culture, especially, okay?
Right, and
So
continuing.
that's a
through
hard
no reference
question.
to
I
Noah.
always turn the hard questions over to Mary Jo.
And you were clarifying something?
Yeah, just like they have no reference or relation to Noah was kind of my question. Like
Well,
they're separate kind of lineages is what I was getting at.
Talking about the Sumerians specifically?
Yeah, and some of those other cultural
Or other
records
people
that were up
groups.
there.
Well, if you
Good question.
If you have the ark landing in the area of Ararat, as it says in the Bible, and these 8 people get off of the ark, and the instruction was be fruitful, multiply and fill the earth. Shortly after that time, in a few generations, they still had not spread out around the earth like God had instructed them. And they were attempting to build the tower that we now refer to as the Tower of Babel. At that point in time, God intervened with their plans, confusing the languages and sending basically people in all directions from that time. And so we can see the dispersion and the spreading of people after the time of the flood in the Tower of Babel, as people multiplied upon the earth and so on. They spread out, they formed the various cultures and languages that we see on the earth today. But they took with them that cultural knowledge of the history. So they would all have a cultural reminder someplace in their ancestry, in their history of Babel and of the flood. And you do see many areas that have, in their history or in their cultural legends talks about the flood. Many of those, the word even sounds similar. They have similarities to the biblical account. Now, what stands out from the biblical account is that it is much more specific. It doesn't read like a fairy tale. It's got specific dates, specific times, specific events that took place, where many of the people, as they spread further from that central area, and they passed on their histories down through the generations, they lost some of that detail. Personally, I believe that they had written records that Noah wrote down and passed on to his descendants, and so they had much more accuracy that they were passing on generation after generation. So that would be why other cultures like the Sumerians and so on,
Descendants
or
of Noah's
descendants,
family.
yeah, they're descendants of Noah's family. I don't know if that answered what the original.
The idea was that that doesn't mean that the Sumerian culture was existing as a Sumerian culture. It's their ancestors that lived long periods of time. Now they've now settled in this area. Now they're called the Sumerians. But this other group settled in this other area. They're called something else. You have a Hittite group. You have all these other groups that now proliferate. There is a tremendous work that was done, basically talking about the increase in civilizations all over the world at about 4,000 years ago, roughly. Okay, all over the world. All of a sudden, you see these pockets, choom, 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 just shooting up like that. Well, I believe that is going to be from some of the descendants of Noah. And you can actually read the biblical record, you can find out where certain parts of his family went, where they proliferated after that. And different cultures then arose from that, okay? And you look at even in Mongolia, where there's a natural history museum. The Mongolians, where did they come from, okay? It's they trace their history to a section of Turkey, but not to Turks. And they basically show that their group came up from Turkey, and then they ended up in the Turkey, from the Turkey all the way up to Mongolia. Part of their people group, they said in their natural history museum, went over, settled into Korea. Okay? And you see similarities all over there. Another part of their people group went down into over the top and actually settled down into the Americas, possibly coming some of the Eskimo tribes, maybe even coming further down because there's so much similarity between the Mongolian and the Navajo Native American group down in Arizona. Okay, and New
Are you
Mexico.
referencing something there? Was there a book about that or something? That migration pattern that you're talking about?
Well, there probably is a book about it. Right now, we're talking about a natural
Museum.
history museum that we viewed when we were in Mongolia. And it was a history museum that had been constructed when they were under the Russian control, under communism. So, I mean, the people that constructed that didn't have any biblical agenda or any biblical heritage in mind that they were talking about. They constructed the museum based on where they believed the people group came from.
There is a book, however, that you might be asking, and I wish we had it here. But you can get it probably on interlibrary loan. It's called After the Flood by Bill Cooper. After the Flood. And it traces the migration of the different people groups, starting with Noah and his family and where they actually went to. Okay, and he had a major thesis he was doing, and he said, if I can demonstrate that maybe 30–40% of the different cultures around the world, all kinds of cultures, trace their heritage back to the same people, okay, then that would pretty well establish the authenticity of the, you might say, the dispersion that that is recorded in the biblical record. Well, he didn't find 30% or 40%. He found more than 90%. They had names like, okay, like for instance, you mentioned Noah. Okay, some of the places they called him Nua. It sounds a lot similar, right? Or their phonetics will be similar to that. And we also now have the Chinese, I mentioned the book, actually recording in their language the specific events coming up. Like somebody might deceive you. I believe that's a woman in a garden, a snake, smaller picture, but it goes right back to the book of Genesis. Okay, right back to it. And so they evidently had knowledge of it at the time, and that's when their culture all of a sudden exploded too, according to Tony Symes' work on showing all of these cultures all of a sudden and cities starting real quickly. But After the Flood by Bill Cooper. That's,
Yeah, we have what, DVD disc with that
Yeah, I have a
That
DVD
on
disc
computer program, computer
by Tony Syme.
data that he produced.
Yeah.
It's not easy reading. But he does have some very fascinating charts in there. With that idea that all the major civilizations seem to spring up about the same time all around the world.
Really intriguing. Next question. Yes.
What would you say the decreasing of lifespan after Noah's flood would be? On average?
What you mean, what brought it about, or what?
What would, like, how many years would like someone's lifespan decrease after?
Yeah, it went from Noah down to about 600, down to about 400, down to 200, down to 120. Today down to what? Average, they say 70 to 80 around. And
Things have been
so
going downhill. Something happened.
it would be, now I don't know how to do it. Dave would maybe know how to take a look at that curve. It looks like an exponential decay curve to me.
Mhm.
But those of you that are mathematicians or statisticians, maybe you can figure that out. But that's the way it looks, which is the way populations oftentimes will go down. It's the way that many things happen in biology. And I think, I mean, the question then becomes is what caused that decline in ages after the flood? And we don't know for sure. Okay, we really don't know for sure. We can project or hypothesize that there was a lot more land mass before the flood. There was more vegetation before the flood. We see fossil evidence of that. When we look at in the fossils, evidence of tremendous amounts of biomass or more trees, more plants. Probably the earth had a more uniformly warmer climate. We
Maybe
think.
more oxygen too.
And we can't prove all of that, but what we do see is evidence that possibly that's what it was. So maybe before the flood, the whole earth was a lot warmer and had more oxygen and also could, have a more pleasant climate. Things could grow very large. Now we can get some circumstantial evidence of that. We don't have direct observation. But what happened after the flood? We have all this water that is now collapsed. Could have been in a canopy. That there are people that believe that there was a canopy of water vapor around the earth.
Not a lot, but enough to.
Enough.
temper the climate.
Enough to temper the climate, to screen out some of the harmful radiation that comes in today. And so that harmful radiation coming in after the time, if that canopy was real, and now we have a drastic increase in radiation, that would increase the mutational rate. And we all carry within our genetics potentially lethal mutations. It's called the genetic load. And so over years, as the genetic load built up in various populations, it would also perhaps influence lifespan. Could also, another possibility too that could play into this is decreasing amounts of vegetation for food, perhaps even the decrease then of the nutritional quality of food over the years. Now, today, we come at it another direction, and we have some technology to help increase, we think, some of that nutrition again through the use of fertilization and so on. But over time, the overall tendency has been downhill. And you can look at those ages in the Bible. People come to the Bible, and a lot of people will look at that and go, oh, the Bible can't be true. People couldn't live that long, 900 years. So they throw the Bible out. I suggest that if we come to something like that in the Bible, we don't automatically say the Bible can't be true. I would come to that data in the Bible and I would say, I wonder what the conditions were like back then, such that people could live that long. And you see, it's a different approach to what you see in the Bible. Instead of saying the Bible must be wrong because today we don't live 900 years, you come at it the other way and you go, well, I wonder what it was like back then that allowed people to live 900 years. The other thing that I think is also a factor in all of this would be that the early generations up to the time of the flood and so on, they're a whole lot closer to the creation than what we are today. So they had from that time on, I mean, we had to build up of mutations. And so their genetics were probably a whole lot more pure than ours are today without the buildup of those genetic mutations. Does that answer?
Okay, question here.
Dave, in one of your slides, you showed Mount St. Helens, this tiny little square.
Tiny dot.
And I remember that I was living in Illinois at the time, and I believe the debris from Mount St. Helens came all the way to Illinois and maybe further. The giant box to the left, and maybe I wasn't paying attention, but what volcano eruption was that, and how big an area did it cover?
That was one of the three. Oh, okay. He was talking about the fact that we have Mount St. Helens, this little tiny dot.
Yeah.
And as far as the amount of ejectite coming out of it. And then we also see way over on the left side of that drawing, this great big volcanic eruption. There were 3 major eruptions in the Yellowstone region, and some of the craters overlap them. And that was the largest one of those 3 eruptions at Yellowstone National Park.
And isn't that in most of the Native American, historical tradition? Because I've read that somewhere that a lot of the Native American tribes from thousands of years ago still talk about that event.
That I am not familiar with. I'd love to hear about that. And if you find that, please pass it on to me. But I do know that there are certain things that Native people groups talk about, and we kind of just say, oh, no way. But guess what? That was recorded, or that was what they said in their own cultures. They saw different things like that. And basically, Yellowstone, even since 1880s, there's been a lot of decrease in some of the activity there. Like the mud volcano in Yellowstone used to shoot up mud 30 feet, 40 feet in the air when the explorers were coming through. And they talked about that and everybody laughed at them. Oh, those are good stories, okay? Until they finally heard enough of it, they decided, we better go check this out. And they found that was all true in Yellowstone. But it was a lot bigger intensity back then. Mud volcano there, roaring mountain, they could hear from miles away. Today, yeah, you get out of your car, you can hear it, but you're not gonna hear it from miles away. Okay, it's lost a lot of its intensity, even though it's amazing still. Okay, you better come this year in case it goes down anymore next year, right?
How many of you have been to Yellowstone National Park? Fair number.
Yeah.
The rest of you, put that in your bucket list. I think it's an amazing place to go to, and you see catastrophic geology in action, and you see results from, things being bigger in the past, but you also see what's going on today yet. So anybody that would like to go on a creation tour of Yellowstone, if you're interested, talk to us. Look online where we do sponsor that Yellowstone trip, and we have an app on the phone too that you can get.
Yeah, we developed an app for Yellowstone National Park tour app, and we're having people say that's even better than the National Park app. It is. It's much more complete, very comprehensive.
What other hard questions we got? We need some hard questions.
Oh, there's one. Wait a minute, is there another one? We've already called on you. Let's come to
There
you.
you go. Go ahead over there.
One.
Let's start with here.
We'll start here. All right. So you were talking earlier at the start of the presentation about viewing like a wall through a different series of lenses, right? It creates like different viewpoints in a way. So wouldn't be viewing like geology through like the views of like the lens of evolution and then the lenses of creationism. Wouldn't that they'd be like kind of distorted, both kind of distorted in different ways? So like, how do you combat that?
Okay, he's asking about viewing the evidence through different colored lenses. Wouldn't it distort your view either way? And yes, it will. If you just blindly accept a worldview and you don't even really know that you have it, where I think the benefit of looking through different colored glasses comes is you can compare the various worldviews and the various lenses, you might say, and see which one fits the facts the best. Because we're not just saying any old lens is as good as another lens. What we're saying is if we only are trained in evolution through our public school education, as I was, when I looked at those rock layers, all I could see was millions of years. That's the way my brain had been programmed to think about rock layers. And even after we got interested in creation and from a biological point of view came to understand that creation was a better model, still, when we looked at those rock layers, we were still thinking millions of years.
Never thought of that earlier.
And part of that was because we had been so trained through our education, you know, and it took us some time. And I remember thinking at that point that, well, I know part of it was I had some scientist friends who also went to our church, but they were laughing at the biblical account of creation and the ark and so on. After a while, when we went back and we looked at all that evidence, it's like all of a sudden it flip-flopped for us. You know, like those optical illusions you look at, and when you look at the box, first it looks like you're looking inside, and then it looks like you're looking at the bottom, and it flip-flops back and forth, and it's kind of like that, because once you get outside of that and put on a different set of glasses and go, I wonder, could it be? But then take it further than that and investigate your worldview too. Okay, so it's not just put on a different set of glasses, but you want the glasses, or take the glasses off completely, clean the glasses and get a view that is really true. But in order to do that, you have to first of all admit that you have a worldview, and you have to start to understand what is your worldview. And then that helps you do better research, I believe.
Can you maybe elaborate on, is it the grade unconformity, the base level there at Grand Canyon?
Okay.
Is it thought from a creationist standpoint that layer there is like the bedrock of like the foundational rock from creation? And then the flood occurred, put the layers down, and then you have catastrophic erosion later of that. Is that a common perspective from a creationist perspective?
Repeat the question.
I'm going to just not try to repeat I can repeat the question as far as he's wondering about the great unconformity in the Grand Canyon, and from a creationist perspective, are we saying that the lower levels below that great unconformity are more creation rocks or that bedrock, and that above the great unconformity you see the layers which we are interpreting as flood rock? And I would say yes, you're accurate as far as I understand your question. You're accurately depicting what we think at this point in time, at least. That has anybody hiked to the bottom of the Grand Canyon? It's an amazing hike. And as you go down, you walk down through all these layers, right? And they're very distinct. And you can see those layers, but then when you get to the great unconformity, it's just like this. And below that, you have this basement rock, or the gneiss and schist, and other kinds of igneous rocks that we believe we're part of the creation week rock that God created when he made the dry land appear. Now, we have that massive rock, and then if you think about at the beginning of the flood water's coming across with tremendous force and eroding it down to where it's really almost flat layer there that they now call the great unconformity. We call it the first flood layers. Now, why would the evolutionists call it a great unconformity? Because there are missing layers of time in the evolutionary viewpoint. It could be missing millions of years from what's underneath that great unconformity to what's above it. And you see that, they call it the great unconformity because you see it worldwide. And so, yeah, it's an amazing geologic factor, I think. And I love to see it. Now, sometimes what you will see in the Grand Canyon, if you go down there, you'll see the massive foundational rock, the bedrock, but then you'll see on top of it some slanted layers of sedimentary rock, but they don't appear to contain any fossils, or there's a few disputed fossils whether they're really true below that layer. But so you've got all these layers, and those layers are lifted up, they're tilted, and then you see it cutting straight up, cut straight out above that, and then the flat layers pretty much flat. And then you have one more factor come, well, there's probably more than one, but another factor entering in is the rise of the Kaibab Plateau. And so it's actually higher by almost 1,000 feet on the 1,000 feet, yeah, on the north side of the canyon is 1,000 feet higher than the south side of Grand Canyon. So if you want to go hike the canyon and you want to go from the bottom to the top, you go on the north side, you got to climb another 1,000 feet. That's significant. On the south side, right around the middle of the park, around the Bright Angel area, it's a mile vertically from the rim of the canyon to the bottom. And you go through all these various layers as you do it. I highly recommend the hike for those of you that are able to do it.
Mary Jo and I has probably led a dozen backpack trips down into the bottom of the Grand Canyon, looking at the geology and the biology of the Grand Canyon and giving tours of it. So we've done that quite a number of times, and so that's kind of fun. And I remember the first time I looked down at that Grand Canyon, and Mary Jo said she'd like to hike that someday. And I looked down there, and I'm used to canyons. I can see how deep that is. And I said, I don't know, I haven't lost anything down there. But then later, here a dozen backpack trips all the way down and back out again.
It is an amazing adventure to go down, though. And if you've been at the edge of the Grand, how many of you have been to the Grand Canyon, to stand on the edge at least? And you look down, it's a big hole, right? But you cannot anywhere near appreciate the size until you've backpacked in or taken a raft trip down the canyon. I mean, the size, the immensity of it is just, it's amazing.
Yeah. And you find out that it looks further up from the bottom of the Grand Canyon than it looks going the other way. It isn't, but it just seems like, because you're going to have to expend a lot of energy to get to the top of that rim with a backpack on. Ooh.
So you pray the prayer of the tired hiker. You pick them up, Lord, I'll put them down. One step at a time.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Way back there.
Hi, yeah, thank you for your talk. I wanted to follow up a little bit on the bedrock concept with the canyon. So if I'm understanding correctly, the bedrock was what God formed initially, and then we have this layer of rock stacked up that then the flood rushed through to create a canyon. And I don't know very much about your background, but I'm assuming you have a younger Earth model. Where did that pile of land come from between creation and the flood?
Okay, yeah, she's asking about the layers between the bedrock and the rim of the canyon, basically, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, because I'm just kind of assuming
Okay,
based on what you talked about.
yeah. We actually do believe that the layers themselves came from the flood. They were laid down by floodwaters. And that they were later on the plateau after or towards the end of the flood, that whole plateau was lifted up. And in the Bible where it says the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down. And so we do have evidence of massive movements of continents and so on coming up. And so probably if you look south of the Grand Canyon, there's a rock feature that you see, what's Red Mountain?
Red Butte.
Red Butte. And you can see additional layers that were on top of those originally, and you can see the evidence they've been eroded away. And so we have even more layers that we believe were eroded away at the end, at the tail end of the flood, or as the mountains rose up and the waters are rushing off. You can see various kinds of erosion. One kind of erosion is sheet erosion, where it might erode a whole layer, so it's pretty flat. But another kind of erosion is where it will go down and erode into a canyon. And that's when the water becomes more channelized, and you take the force of that moving water and carry away big chunks, or steepness of the terrain and so on can be involved. So we think that the layers were formed primarily by the flood. I'm not going to say every layer was, because there's some layers after, when you get further up the column, that may or may not have been from that flood event. But the main layers that you see that contain the main fossil record, those things we believe were laid down during that 1 year catastrophic event of the flood, and then eroded toward the end of the flood or shortly thereafter. Does that
Okay. And follow up on that?
Nope.
No,
Good.
okay, she's good. Another one.
Waiting patiently.
Okay.
Yeah, so question for you. Earlier in the presentation, you showed a picture of the ocean and the earth and the earth's crust that go under the earth. By the ocean, I'm referring to deep, just the deep, because the deep is also just like in the Bible, it's referring to the ocean. So to my understanding, what's under the ocean and what's under the earth is crust, as far as what I've been taught in schools and whatnot. But see, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me when I read the Bible, because it says that the fountains of the deep were opened up. And so it wasn't just water coming from above, it was flooding coming from under as well. And so the way I understand it is that there's water under the ocean and possibly under the earth. What do you think? Do you think there's water under the ocean, or do you think it's just Earth's crust when referring to the fountains of the deep?
I think there's water under the ocean, and in a certain way, if you're gonna subduct all this stuff, that's kind of a wet fluid thing that you're subducting underneath the continent. It's not just rock. There's a lot of water that's gonna be going down there as well, okay? But what I wanted, I'll point out something about that model called the runaway subduction model, where you have this subduction going very quickly. When you do that, when it's going to stop is when you get all of that very dense crust, oceanic crust, subducted all the way underneath that continent. What that leaves is way back over there, many, many, many miles away. You now have that open spot where there's fresh lava coming up. Call that the Mid-Atlantic Spreading Ridge, if you wish. Okay, could very likely be that, but that's fresh molten material coming up from the mantle. It turns out that the fresh molten material is a lot lighter than the older olivine, older type of all kinds of minerals going in there, but the older type crust. The older that gets, the more dense it is. That's the way it is in that particular type of rock and geology. And so what happens is you have the younger material being a lot lighter. It solidifies, it cools, okay? But that's a lighter material, so the mantle can push it up higher than it did that real dense rock. Okay? If it can push that up further, what it's doing is also pushing up the water up. So now, instead of the water level being here, you've got the water level coming in here. Now it's inundating the continent. It's inundating the continent. Okay? And that is another source of that water is coming from the actual ocean itself. And that could be fountains of the great deep. Plus, another thing, when you have all this fresh volcanic material coming up in the middle, you're going to have all kinds of, let's call them geysers. Okay? That's water spouts. They're going to go up into the atmosphere. That's going to contribute to the amount of rainfall that you're going to have over the continents as well. So that particular model works really well. And that's why a lot of geologists are starting to jump on that and favorably, but it doesn't happen slowly, it happens quickly. Okay, so that also, it's gonna, when you bring that type of material into the underneath, into the mantle, it causes circulation patterns into the mantle. When you got moving fluid material, circulation like that, produces magnetism. So how can we explain some of the magnetic shifting? How do we explain some of the magnetic signatures that you might find on some of these rocks? It may be just the flow pattern within the mantle that's going on that's doing it. Okay. So that's, I mean, there's a lot of things that model touches and does a really good job with it. And the one who actually did that model, Dr. John Baumgartner, basically programmed the computer what was going to happen at X and a whole pile of points, data points. What's going to happen here? What's going to happen here? What's going to happen here? And his model actually could predict where it's going to break up and where they're going to go to. And so that his model had a lot of predictive value.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
no,
it's definitely worth analyzing. Go to our website, you have one easy, the picture I showed you. Go to discovercreation.org and look up runaway subduction. Just
Yeah.
look for, just search for that. If you go not only to our site, if you expand the search to other sites under runaway subduction, you'll probably find some of the original papers that Dr. John Baumgartner wrote. They're not on our site, but they're at some of the others. Okay.
yeah, no, that's great. I was just, so I agree with what you're saying. It makes sense that the, you know, that goes into the ocean and then out, that rises the water over the land as the valley and you know, anything else. But my question is really is that at the bottom of the ocean, is there any evidence that you've seen in your career that at the bottom of the ocean that there is water under the foundation of the ocean? That when it refers to the fountains of the deep, is that the ocean opened up and water rised in, creating a larger ocean also.
Is there evidence of the a lot of water underneath the, say, oceanic crust?
Correct.
Okay, with kind of like the fountains of the great deep opening up, bursting forth. And I mentioned that one mineral called ringwoodite. There's a lot of water in there. We release a little bit of that pressure in there, it sweats. And that water can now be, it's under high pressure. It could be shooting up in many places, if that's the case. And so that's where some have suggested the fountains of the great deep. So that might be, we don't know that. We just don't know that, but that is one good potential
and that most people had never considered 7 years ago. Okay, and prior, but
Thanks,
now they're considering it.
Appreciate that. Were you kind of coming to a close on that point?
Yeah.
Awesome. So real quick, what I would like to do is ask for a minute long preview of what's tomorrow night.
Oh,
So
tomorrow,
at our church service, flyers on the table, if you're curious, what are you gonna, dinosaurs and dragons, the hard and the soft facts? What's a preview of what you're gonna talk about? Why would I be interested in that?
oh. Well, everybody's interested in dinosaurs, aren't they? You know, I used to be a geologist. I was going to be a paleontologist specializing in dinosaurs, actually. That's what I was going to be originally. In the area where we live, I used to look for dinosaur fossils. I already found, by the time I was 14, 2 different fossils, fairly reasonably complete skeletons of dinosaurs. One's a Stegosaurus, another one's an Allosaurus. Okay, so, and then I found bits and pieces of a whole bunch of others. But anyhow, I was well on my way to becoming Dinosaur Dave. Now I'm Dinosaur Dave because of age. Okay. But regardless of that, we're going to look at dinosaurs and see if there's a different way to view dinosaurs. Did they really live millions of years ago? Did they all die out? Are there prehistoric animals? And we'll compare that and find out if there really is such a thing. And then I think one of the big thrusts of it is, how do they get so big? Were they real? How do you know what these museums are telling you? How do they know those facts that they put in? And I'm going to show a lot of facts. I'm going to show the good stories, but they have no knowledge that that actually occurred. Okay, I'll be showing some of that. I'll also be making the connection between dinosaurs and dragons. I'll ask this group right here, the whole group. How many in here believe in dragons? You got a few, there we go. Now, how many of those who believe in dragons believe they can breathe fire? A few, okay, all right. Now, for the rest of you who do not believe in dragons, let me give you the classical definition of a dragon. A dragon is a large reptile. Classical definition. Okay, now how many believe in dragons? Almost unanimous, those who are willing to raise their hand. Okay. Komodo dragon, okay. A large reptile. I'm going to make the connection that dragons and dinosaurs were likely one and the same thing. Okay, I'm going to make that connection tomorrow, and I'm going to do it by showing a huge amount of artifacts, you might say, and drawings on cave walls, on pottery, lots of different things. All the way from the Amazon River, South America, all the way to China, all Africa, etc. We're going to look at some of those things, okay? And what they are those drawings. You look at them, they're dragons, but you look at the body shape, the body parts, and it looks like the same animal that we have reconstructed in the museums and call it a dinosaur. Okay, so that's one of the major thrusts. Go ahead.
Yeah, just in case you can't make it tomorrow, so you don't think we're absolutely positively crazy. The word dinosaur was not even around until the mid 1800s when it was first used. And so people, we think, before that time used the word dragon when they were referring to what we would call today a dinosaur, because that word was not even necessarily used that early on. So the word dragon is probably a more broader term.
I'm also going to mention the soft tissue that has been found in petrified dinosaur bone. And I myself used to cut and polish dinosaur bone. And many times I would be grinding through it and I get a rotten egg smell on dinosaur bone. And what I was doing, I didn't realize it back when many years ago, back when the dinosaurs were still around, I was actually grinding through soft tissue that is rotting of the dinosaur. It's still there. I didn't realize the significance of it, and it wasn't just once, it was a bunch of times. Okay, I'll be talking about that. And also, we're gonna look at the idea, did dinosaurs evolve into birds? We'll talk about that, because that's the common story here today. Okay,
Awesome.
We'll talk
And
about it.
and that presentation will also be recorded and put up on our YouTube channel if you can't make it. So I'm gonna close the formal Q&A, but we have this room for another half an hour. So if you'd like to come and talk to David, Mary Jo, or any one of us here as part of Maranatha Christian Fellowship and International Student Outreach, you're welcome to hang out and talk to us. Check out the materials. And let's thank David, Mary Jo once again. Thanks, guys.
Great attention.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming and giving us your Friday night. We appreciate you coming. Hope to see you again.
We also have a sign up sheet